They tell us, get over it. But this was only the year 1964, not 100 years ago. If you are here for the truth about what changed after the civil rights, consider subscribing as we aim 1,000, because this channel, it doesn't sanitize history.
I can't solve the problem. You guys pull the strings that close schools. You guys draw the boundaries that keep our kids restricted to the ghetto.
Donald Trump said that he feels like the Civil Rights Act made white people get a disadvantage in life and that it's not fair.
What? Bro, what are you talking about, man?
The recent claim by President Trump that the 1964 Civil Rights Act harmed white Americans is just wrong, and it's dangerous. It rewrites history in a way that fuels fear and resentment.
And under his administration, the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission says there could be reparations for this discrimination.
He got jokes.
So this is my question. When did it all go downhill for white guys?
Without black Americans, the country not only becomes quieter, it becomes vastly more racist and vastly more dangerous and unequal.
As we know, Lyndon B. Johnson said he would have those N-words voting for Democrats for the next 200 years, and here we are 65 years later still voting for Democrats. During that time, we know black people were some of the most married in this country. We were married at about an 85% rate. Black men were in the workforce at about 83%. The money was so good that this was the only time in U.S. history that the earnings gap between black and white men was actually closing. We were actually outpacing them.
What you said made no sense. You said during the time between 1940s and 1970s that black people were living in the golden age. And just to make sure I wasn't confused, let's play it back.
During the 1940s and 1960s, it was actually called the golden age for the middle class.
You know, the time of slavery, really, when the Republican Party was formed in order to combat slavery, all the way until 1960, where the Republic or the Democratic Party finally said, you know what, we might not like these people, but we can at least get their vote as long as we keep them under our thumb.
We're going to have a quick lesson here today on the 1964 Civil Rights Act. All right. That act railroaded colored Americans. That act is what opened the floodgates to immigration inside of our country. All right.
This photograph changed the course of American history. This is James Brock on June 18th, 1964 in St. Augustine, Florida, these United States of America, dumping acid into his pool at the Monson Motor Lodge. Now, why would he do such an insane thing, you might ask?
They used to have a public pool. And then after the Civil Rights Act, they had to start letting people of color into their public pools.
Yeah, thank goodness the Republicans fought for that.
And white people decided they would rather fill the pools with concrete and let nobody swim than have to swim with black people.
Yep, although that wasn't widespread across the country, that did happen in a few municipalities. But here's what's interesting about your rant. I think you're confusing white people with Democrats.
The Fourth Civil Rights Act is important. It's literally the beginning of the end of why black people were leaving the South. And if you just read it, you realize it just ended discrimination. So does it truly make sense to say the law that stopped black people from being discriminated against hurts black people, but then saying that during the time black people was leaving discrimination, they're doing better? I mean, does it make sense?
One of white people's main talking points in this country is always black people need to build themselves up by their bootstraps, which is hilarious because white people have never had to do that since their inception in this country.
So to my white brothers and sisters, the Civil Rights Act was never meant to harm you. It was meant to heal a nation broken by injustice. Fairness does not steal from you. Justice strengthens us all.
This is the third Reconstruction. It started in 2020. It's going to go to 2030 or thereabouts. The first Reconstruction was about freedom. The second one, civil rights movement. Third Reconstruction.
Black Americans are poorer today in 2024 than they were in the 1950s.
Yes, why do you think that
Good
is?
question. So we have the Civil Rights Act, we have more benefits, more government programs. Something changed between the 1950s and 2024. So there's two answers to this question. Either America got more racist since 1950s to 2024, so like that 70-year period, because Black Americans are worse off today per capita.
Yeah,
than
I
they
agree
were.
with
You agree with that? Okay, good.
Yeah.
Than in the 1950s. Or there's another explanation.
Civil rights keeps you under his restrictions, under his jurisdiction. Human rights are something you were born with.
Do y'all have any idea how many things we've accomplished as African Americans in 59 years? And that's from the ending of the civil rights movement to today.
Jim Crow, then versus now, has America really changed? Even the justice system shows echoes of the past. During Jim Crow, arrests and prison labor kept people trapped in poverty. Today,
Now, with that background, the civil rights era did change America. That part remains undeniable. But the real question is, what exactly changed and what didn't? Was it progress? Was it a political strategy? Or did something shift, in ways that we still don't fully understand to this day? So let's listen to a few perspectives, then I'll break it down later.
In 1965, the Democratic establishment pulled off the greatest magic trick in American political history. They had all of Black America looking at the right hand, celebrating the Voting Rights Act, the marches, and the end of Jim Crow. But while we were distracted by the ballot, the left hand was quietly signing a bill that would dismantle the Black American middle class before it had even had a chance to stand up. It was called the Hart-Celler Act of 1965. They slipped it through Congress just 2 months after the Voting Rights Act. They sold it to us as another civil rights victory. They told us it was about fairness. In reality, it was a calculated economic trade. At the moment, Black men were finally getting access to the high-wage union jobs in places like Detroit, Chicago, Pittsburgh, and more. But this bill, it sneaked in a mechanism to flood those same cities with a new, cheaper immigrant labor workforce. They handed us the vote with one hand, and they slashed our wages and economics with the other.
Do y'all have any idea how many things we've accomplished as African Americans in 59 years? And that's from the ending of the civil rights movement to today. In the midst of teaching, I also learned something. And before anybody get on here and say, I already knew that. Shut up, shit, sit down and listen. In the last 59 years, African Americans have made some significant strides in many areas. We've seen the first Black president of the United States, Barack Obama, elected and served 2 terms. We've also made significant contributions in arts, music, literature, sports. We've even seen figures like Oprah Winfrey, Jordan, Toni Morrison, Bron James, just to name a few. Y'all, we even made progress in the business world with notable figures like Ursula Burns, the first Black woman that had a Fortune 500 company. And I can't lie, as African American, we still have a lot of work to do, and we still got a lot of more contributions to make. And just think, all of this was done after the civil rights movement in 59 years. 59 years, y'all.
This photograph changed the course of American history. This is James Brock on June 18th, 1964 in St. Augustine, Florida, these United States of America, dumping acid into his pool at the Monson Motor Lodge. Now, why would he do such an insane thing, you might ask? Well, the Civil Rights Bill had yet to be passed, and Florida was still a segregated state. So these young people in the pool here were conducting what they called a swim-in. It's like a sit-in that we've all seen photos of at counters across the South to help integrate public places, but they did it this time in a swimming pool. And when James Brock saw these young Black children in his pool, in his whites-only pool, his natural response was to go get some acid and dump it on these youngsters. Now, Congress had already been debating passing the Civil Rights Act that summer, and they weren't sure if the Senate had enough votes or not. But after this fiasco at the Monson Motor Lodge in Florida, and these photos went public, The Civil Rights Bill was passed the next day. The Monson Motor Lodge was known for being a whites-only establishment, so Dr. Martin Luther King brought an integrated group of people, black and whites, to try to force them to integrate. But when they arrived on June 18th, they were immediately met with press and a large police force. The adult white protesters were arrested almost immediately, and while they were being shuttled into police cars out front, the kids jumped in the pool in the back. Now, there were some white guests at the hotel who claimed they invited these kids to come and join them in the pool. They were obviously part of the protest, and Brock freaked out, screaming at them, "You're not putting these people in my pool." Went to his office, got 2 gallons of acid, and tried to dump it on the heads of Mamie Nell Ford, Brenda Darton, and John J.T. Johnson. And when dumping acid on teenagers didn't work, the police got involved. They tried to beat the children out of the pool, until finally off-duty police officer Henry Billets jumped into the pool to try to escort the children out and arrest them all immediately. After all the children were arrested and escorted away, Brock decided to drain the pool and refill it, cleansing it. He also hired armed guards for the swimming pool and decided to fly the Confederate flag above it. He continued to kiss up to the KKK that summer as civil rights was forcing public places to integrate in the South. His business was picketed by whites if he integrated, bombed by the KKK with Molotov cocktails, but sued if he didn't integrate. And the racial tension in town eventually caused the bankruptcy of the Monson Motor Lodge. But this horrifying image was already burned indelibly into the minds of Americans, and the Civil Rights Act passed because of it.
Look at back in the day, there used to be public pools in almost every town in the South.
Yep.
No matter how big or small the town was, they used to have a public pool. And then after the Civil Rights Act, they had to start letting people of color into their public pools.
Yeah, thank goodness the Republicans fought for that.
And white people decided they would rather fill the pools with concrete and let nobody swim than have to swim with black people.
Yep, although that wasn't widespread across the country, that did happen in a few municipalities. But here's what's interesting about your rant. I think you're confusing white people with Democrats. You see, Caroy, Illinois was one of the cities that did that. And in the 60s, they were under Democrat leadership. Nashville, Tennessee was another one that did that, and they were under Democrat leadership in the 60s. St. Augustine, Florida was met with violence. They actually put acid in their pool. It was under Democrat leadership in the 60s. Democrats are the racists. They always have been, and it appears that they always will be.
I was today years old when I learned that college used to be free here in the United States. It all changed toward the end of the Civil Rights Movement in the late 60s. Then Governor of California, Ronald Reagan, devised a plan to weed out undesirables. The undesirables were black and brown people on college campuses protesting for civil rights and against the war in Vietnam. Old Ronald started pulling funding from the University of California, so that meant they had to start charging tuition to the students. Slowly, the rest of the country followed suit, and today, the money that would have funded higher education now supports the prison system.
White people in America act like their history got a reboot in Y2K in the year 2000, and that the things that they have done historically and are part of American history haven't been documented. Donald Trump said that he feels like the Civil Rights Act made white people get a disadvantage in life and that it's not fair.
What? Bro, what are you talking about, man?
This point of view inherently is erasing, diminishing, and dismissing all the things that America has done to black people leading up to the Civil Rights Movement and the necessity for the Civil Rights Act.
Another wider point about who the United States should let in. What is your view of that? I mean,
America wasn't founded by grabbing a bunch of dudes from other countries, bringing them here, giving them free apartments and welfare. It was by people who wanted to escape religious persecution.
About the founding of America, it was founded by European colonizers, built on the backs of enslaved Africans and on the genocide of indigenous people. To claim that it wasn't, just a free handout, it literally was. The Homestead Act, which was finally repealed in 1987, gave hundreds of millions of acres of free land to white European immigrants while denying them to the descendants of enslaved Africans. And
one of white people's main talking points in this country is always black people need to build themselves up by their bootstraps, which is hilarious because white people have never had to do that. since their inception in this country. From colonizing the land to killing the natives with disease to stealing the land from natives to bringing Africans here to work for free under slavery to things like the Homestead Act, which gave millions of acres of lands to descendants of Europeans only, and things like 40 acres and a mule, which they were supposed to give the black people once we fought for our freedom, and that never occurred. To the GI Bill and your grandfather going to war, coming home, building a middle class wealth because the country gave him housing, healthcare, and education, but my grandfather came back and had no rights as a black man and did not benefit from the GI Bill, and black people being forced into ghettos and poor neighborhoods due to redlining and unfair banking practices, white people being the highest recipients of welfare, food stamps being created after the Great Depression and being given to white people only, and black people weren't allowed to receive them, welfare being given to white people only and black people not being allowed to receive them, and currently today, white people are the highest demographic on all of these social safety nets. Why do white people lie about their part in the history of America? Why can't we acknowledge the things that we have historically done to black people, to Native Americans, and move forward? Why can't we do that? To keep your largely poor, uneducated white base uneducated about the effects of their ancestors is a form of control. I mean, MAGA controls the minds of these people in a way. It is not almost cult-like. It is cult-like. And the more you keep people uneducated is the more and more history can repeat itself, and history is actually not taught.
We confront the killing of good. We must also confront the killing of truth. The recent claim by President Trump that the 1964 Civil Rights Act harmed white Americans is just wrong, and it's dangerous. It rewrites history in a way that fuels fear and resentment. My fathers and so many leaders of the movement, Fred Shuttlesworth, Diane Nash, John Lewis, I can call the roll, but I won't do it today, did not risk their lives to divide this nation. They did not risk their lives to divide this nation. They did so because America was denying millions basic rights, the right to work, the right to vote, to live where they please, to move through society with dignity. The Civil Rights Act did not give black people special treatment. It made discrimination illegal. The same discrimination you're trying to turn around and use. It required the law to protect everyone equally. That is democracy. So to my white brothers and sisters, the Civil Rights Act was never meant to harm you. It was meant to heal a nation broken by injustice. Fairness does not steal from you. Justice strengthens us all. And so we must not fall for the politics of fear, the lie that we must choose between one another to thrive. America is stronger when more people are included, when we are united in respect and love, not when we retreat in fear. The beloved community is not built by blaming one another. It's built by protecting the dignity of everyone. And so, on this King holiday, we are not going backwards. We are not going backwards.
You know who claims that there's a downside to the Civil Rights Act. He says, and I quote, white people were very badly treated. Where they did extremely well. and they were not invited to go into a university or a college. And under his administration, the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission says there could be reparations for this discrimination.
He got jokes.
Take a look at this clip.
Are you a white male who's experienced discrimination at work based on your race or sex? You may have a claim to recover money under federal civil rights laws. The EEOC is the federal agency charged with enforcing federal anti-discrimination law against businesses and other private sector employers. The EEOC is committed to identifying, attacking, and eliminating all forms of race and sex discrimination, including against white male applicants and employees.
So this is my question. When did it all go downhill for white guys? I mean, okay, so like, I know that in 1955, when I was born, black folks didn't have the full vote in the United States.
Yeah.
Black folks couldn't really go to colleges without a big old hassle. So what was the problem then? I remember when women tried to get into these colleges. I remember when women had to fight to have the jobs that broke the glass ceilings. These were women, okay, just women. And now you want me to cry for the white guys who have always had, it seemed, many more advantages. They could go and get a bank loan.
Yeah.
My mom couldn't do that.
Yeah.
They could own a credit card.
They could own a credit card by themselves.
Yeah.
Here's how quickly political progress can be made and how quickly political progress can be lost. Just 5 years after the Civil War ended, Mississippi elected the first African American to serve in either house of the U.S. Congress, Reverend Hiram Revels. And just 5 years after that, a formerly enslaved man, Blanche K. Bruce, became a U.S. Senator, also elected by Mississippi. But after Bruce's election in 1875, no black person would be elected to the U.S. Senate for nearly 100 years until 1967. Similarly, just 7 years after the Civil War ended, Louisiana had a black governor for a month, due to the impeachment of the previous governor. But after this, there would be no black governor of any state until 1989. Lastly, in the 1870s, South Carolina's state legislature was majority African American, which reflected the state's population, which was majority African American. But within a couple of decades, there were 0 black legislatures in the state of South Carolina. This is the story of the Reconstruction era and of the rise of the Jim Crow era in its wake. And whenever I teach this history, I feel both a call to hope and a call to vigilance, because our nation is capable of taking remarkable strides toward democracy, and none of those strides can be taken for granted. Every single one of them will have to be fought for again and again.
I can't solve the problem. You guys pull the strings that close schools. You guys draw the boundaries that keep our kids restricted to the ghetto. You guys write up the restrictive covenants that keep us out of houses. So it's up to you to talk to your brothers and your sisters and persuade them that they have a responsibility. We've assumed ours for over 400 years, and we're tired of this kind of stuff now. We're not going to suffer patiently anymore. No more turning the other cheek. No more blessing our enemies. No more praying for those who despitefully use us. We're going to show you that we've learned the lessons you've taught us. We've studied your history, and you did not take over this country by singing "We Shall Overcome." You did not gain control of the world like you have it now by dealing fairly with a man and keeping your word. You're treaty breakers, you're liars, you're thieves, you rape entire continents and races of people. Then you wonder why these very people don't have any confidence or trust in you. Your religion means nothing. Your law is a farce, and we see it every day. You demonstrated it in Alabama. And I can say you because you're part of the whole system. You profit from it. In fact, you make your living from it. You couldn't walk around and talk to people, stand up in your pulpit on Sunday and preach nice little songs and say, now we're going to give thanks to the Lord for he is good and old Jesus be among us. As far as we're concerned, your Jesus is contaminated, just like everything else you tried to force upon us is contaminated. So you can have him, And here's what I'll say. I wish you would follow Jesus like we followed him. Because if you did that, then we'd be in charge tomorrow. I think the problem is so bad that we can have no understanding at all.
You think it's gotten to the point where there can never be that reconciliation?
No. You talk about justice, and it means one thing to you, and we talk about it and means something else to us. And it'll always be that way. And I'd like you to know I have a terrible feeling against preachers, because I think you guys are the ones who are largely responsible for the problem in the first place. And you can accept it or not any way you choose. And for you, this may be an excursion, you know, across the line.
What about the person that wants to listen? I genuinely feel that I want to listen.
Well, if you listen and try to do something, you get kicked out of your church. See, that's the way your people are.
Well, we do make changes. So the change that have come have been drastic.
God bless you, little brother. Come back and see us again sometime.
Do you remember where you were when you realized that the post-civil rights era was over? I was grabbing coffee with one of my friends last week, and then this headline popped up. The courts are now making it illegal for black investors to provide grants to other black businesses and black women. Mind you, black people receive less than 1% of all venture capital funding. So now this case is going to go to the Supreme Court, where the wife of one of the conservative Supreme Court members was complaining about how she hates looking at the pride flag during Pride Month. Without a doubt, it seems like we're sleepwalking to fascism.
The conversation on civil rights would collapse. The conversation on social justice would collapse overnight. And no disrespect to my other minority groups, but history has sadly shown that progress in America has always been pushed forward by black Americans. Whether it was Crispus Attucks, a black soldier being the first man to die in the Revolutionary War in 1776, or the Civil Rights Act of 1964, or the Voting Rights Act of 1965, or the Hart-Celler Immigration Act of 1965 that literally opened up the door for millions of Cubans, African, Asian, Dominican, and South American brothers to come to America. So without black Americans, the country not only becomes quieter, it becomes vastly more racist and vastly more dangerous and unequal. Next thing that happened to America, if every black American left overnight, is that America would suffer an immediate cultural fallout, and it will be vastly less safe and vastly less equal for my minority communities that stay in this country.
The 1964 Civil Rights Act was trash. That's right, I said it. It did nothing but accelerate the decline of black America in this country. As we know, Democrats only passed that bill so they can have a grip on the black vote. As we know, Lyndon B. Johnson said he would have those N-words voting for Democrats for the next 200 years, and here we are 65 years later still voting for Democrats. I guess they have us under political slavery for the next 135 years, and I guess we'll figure it out in the next lifetime. But I want to show you guys the period before this. During the 1940s and 1960s, it was actually called the Golden Age for the middle class black Americans. The Golden Age because we were actually doing very well in this country. So when they always ask, when has America been great for black people? That was the time. During that time, we know black people were some of the most married in this country. We were married at about an 85% rate. We were bringing our children into the world into two-parent households at about 82 to 83%. Black men were in the workforce at about 83%. All right. We doubled our home ownership. Without government, we lowered our poverty rate from 87 to lower than 47%. We lowered our literacy rates to lower than 4%. We started expanding our HBCUs and building more institutions such as black-owned banks. We started churning out more black professionals such as doctors, lawyers, engineers, teachers. All right? With earnings, more black men started entering manufacturing and construction by joining the unions. They started getting paid really good money. The money was so good that this was the only time in U.S. history that the earnings gap between black and white men was actually closing. We were actually outpacing them in success. Yes, black America was outpacing the success of white America. Boom, Democrats take over, liberals take over. Bill was passed. Lyndon B. Johnson inserts the Great Society as well as the War on Poverty. During the Great Society, they inserted something called the Urban Renewal Project, which was later known as the Urban Negro Removal Project. With that, they inserted eminent domain. Eminent domain, if you're not familiar with it, is pretty much the government being able to take your land if they're going to use it for the public. And that is exactly what they did. Also, during that Urban Renewal Project, they wanted to get rid of the slums and the eyesores of the country. And of course, they said that this was the black areas. But those black areas were not eyesores at all. They were actually very thriving communities. But then they bulldozed it down. And the areas that they couldn't bulldoze, they just built freeways and interstates right over them. Also at that time, we can't remember that the Vietnam conflict was going on, and though black men made up about 7% of the population, well, they made up about 25% of the frontline soldiers in the war. Not only that, but the high-risk soldiers, such as the airborne troops, black men made up about 45% of them. My uncles were a part of that, as well as my father. While these men were going away to Vietnam, Lyndon B. Johnson accelerated the offshoring of those manufacturing companies, the companies that these black men depended on, the same companies that allowed these men to take care of humongous families and make their wives stay-at-home wives. When they came back, those companies were gone. They were now coming back to unemployment. And with unemployment, we also have to remember this is when the narcotics started to enter our communities. You guys watched the movie American Gangster? Well, Frank Lucas was bringing those same narcotics back with our soldiers from Vietnam and putting it right into our communities. So now you have strung out men, you have unemployed men, and with that comes the expansion of welfare. With the expansion of welfare was such thing called the marriage clause, which prohibited the man from being in the household if the woman was going to be able to get benefits. We have to remember that this wasn't just some baby daddies. These were actually married men having to leave their wife and children in order for the government to take care of their families. I want to share something quick with you guys before I get up off of here. Growing up in the 90s in Louisiana, New Orleans to be exact, who that nation? I remember times we would be outside as kids. In the hood and the projects, you would see certain days where the men would just disappear. And you really think, damn, where did all the men go? They would get a heads up that the caseworkers and social workers would come into the hood to do inspections to see if the men were living in the home. If they found out that man was in the home, those benefits and welfare would be stripped away from the women and children. Yep. Once those caseworkers would leave, the men would come back. To my people from the deep, deep South, the dirty, dirty country, y'all remember how many black families we used to have where the mother and children live in one spot and the father would live across the street or down the street? Y'all remember that? Oh, that's too much trenches for y'all? All right. So you Democrats, please tell me, what has this progress in liberalism done? Please let me know. Let me know what you guys think in the comments. Thank you for listening. Hope you guys have a great weekend. Please like, share. I'll see you guys on the next one.
Now, this is why arguing on the internet with folks is not for everybody. Because sometimes, every now and then, you will F around and find out that you are talking to the wrong one. Now, this man right here was trying to essentially rebuttal an entire statement I made about how Lyndon Baines Johnson, who was elected into office in '64 after JFK's assassination, brought in social welfare reforms that disincentivized black folk from having two parents in a household and incentivized single mother households. And I said how that was the turning point where black folks started to struggle more than they ever had historically, besides before 1863 and slavery. So this guy says FDR is the one who created social welfare. 2, why would he not? Black folks were already unable to be self-sufficient, considering 100 years after slavery and 0 rich black folks in the 70s. All right. So first and foremost, FDR's biography, okay? This is the first F around and find out moment. If you read into FDR's history, yes, there was social reform, but you have to understand the context which that social reform was in, right? It was not a mutually exclusive to urban areas. So I'm just going to leave that there. Please make sure to actually educate yourself before jumping on the internet and trying to get at folks. Secondly, there was a woman by the name of Madam C.J. Walker who was born 2 years after the Emancipation Proclamation. She was born in 1867. This woman died in 1919 and she became the first black billionaire, which means she became a billionaire right out of slavery. A woman who was an indentured servant for most of her life, then built her own business, even in the midst of Jim Crow. There were a multitude of wealthy black folk who were dominating industry within their own ecosystem. Now, was it a fair system? I would not say so. The Democratic Party institutionalized Jim Crow, segregation. So black folk had to be reliant upon themselves. The government was not going to necessarily view them as equals, right? The Democratic powers that be from, the time of slavery, really, when the Republican Party was formed in order to combat slavery, all the way until 1960, where the Republic or the Democratic Party finally said, you know what, we might not like these people, but we can at least get their vote as long as we keep them under our thumb. And Lyndon Baines Johnson himself, he was quoted as saying, we're going to have these Negroes voting Democrat for the next 60 years. And his prophecy has pretty much come manifest. So this is a complete rebutted statement. The first statement is, well, it's a half-truth because, yes, it was social welfare, but that had nothing to do with the state of black folk in America. Just research Black Wall Street. Simple as that. Second here is black folk were already unable to be self-sufficient. They were one of the most self-sufficient peoples in America because they literally had to do for self. Literally. There's an entire segment of history that is oftentimes forgotten and people think it was, just this wasteland. Black folk was just running amok. No, they were the most married in around 85% with two parents in the household. They were building industry and infrastructure. Now they had to combat the Democratic, racist party that formed the Cool Kids Club and looked to eradicate them. But even in spite of that, they were able to mobilize and build. When the tides turned was when Lyndon Baines Johnson, or at least him and his cronies, switched the game and essentially started to bring black people in, not because of goodwill, but instead because of the benefit they would have with a stronghold, with a vote of individuals or a demographic of people that was growing faster than any other demographic of people. That's what that was about.
The 1964 Civil Rights Act actually hurt black people in a lot of ways. And let me tell you why. Roll the clip. Welcome back, class, and happy Sunday. If this is your first time here, this is our digital classroom by the name of Unspoken Curriculum, where we talk about politics as well as history. Sometimes we put them two together. We're going to have a quick lesson here today on the 1964 Civil Rights Act, all right? That act railroaded colored Americans. All of the civil rights bills before that was specifically to address the problems within colored America. But it was railroaded in the 1964 version of this. It now changed the verbiage and the language from American Negro, we can say, to now saying race. They also added in two different things. One was religion, the other one was sex. The sex part of this was added in as a joke. Your Democrats thought that adding that in would make the Republicans vote against the bill, but it backfired. And Republicans actually supported it. And even your woman-led Democrats at that time, they came together with Republicans to get sex entered in. So, all of you women who are voting today, especially you black women, realize that the Democratic Party did not want you voting. It was a joke. Let's get back into the racial part of this. Now, as you see today, a lot of different minority groups, anytime they are fighting for anything or they're going through a struggle, they love to tie themselves into the black community by way of the Civil Rights Act. They always try to make us feel like we should understand where they're coming from because our people went through it. You are correct. Our people went through it, not everybody else's. All right. And let me add this on here to kind of show you why I say that. A big bill came right after the 1964 Civil Rights Act, and that was the Immigration and Nationality Act of 1965. That act is what opened the floodgates to immigration inside of our country. All right. Before that bill, America had a quota system. They was not letting everybody inside of America. We'll use Mexico, for example, only because they make up a big part of our immigration right now. And before 1965, America could say, look, we're going to only accept 2,000 of y'all this year. After that, no one else can come. You have to wait till next year. And they did this all over the world for different countries. But they did give European countries a higher threshold, right? They were able to bring in more people. But the other countries, very little, all right? Once these people started coming into our country, this is when they started flooding in our communities and flooding in our businesses, all inside of the black communities. That is why you see so many different minorities running all of the stores, running all of the businesses. They've been doing that since the late 60s all the way up to now. That is what the Civil Rights Bill of 1964 got us. Let me know what y'all think about this one. Comment, share, make sure to find me on that Y app. You can find out how to get me there in my bio on TikTok. I'll see you guys in the next one. The 1964 Civil Rights Act was trash. As right, I said it. It did nothing but accelerate the decline of black America in this country. As we know, Democrats only passed that bill so they can have a grip on the black vote. As we know, Lyndon B. Johnson said he would have those N-words voting for Democrats for the next 200 years, and here we are 65 years later still voting for Democrats. I guess they have us under political slavery for the next 135 years, and I guess we'll figure it out in the next lifetime. But I want to show you guys the period before this. During the 1940s and 1960s, it was actually called the golden age for the middle class black Americans.
We about to fact check this first. If you mess with me, make sure hit that follow button. Let's get it. What the hell is he talking about? First, you do understand that more Republicans was for the 1964 Civil Rights Act than Democrats, right? Both in the House and the Senate, we seen more Democrats voted against the Civil Rights Act than Republicans. Before we see why the Civil Rights Act of 1964 is important, we're going to explain why what you said made no sense. You said during the time between 1940s and 1970s that black people were living in the golden age, and just to make sure I wasn't confused, let's play it back.
During the 1940s and 1960s, it was actually called the golden age for the middle class.
You do understand that 1940 through the 1970s, we was going through the second Great Migration, right? Great Migration actually started in 1910, where over 5 million black people left the South and was traveling north in America. Over 90% of African Americans was living in the South. During this time, black people in the South was facing segregation known as the Jim Crow era. So they moved up north for better opportunities and to get away from discrimination. And between the 1940s and 1970s was the second surge of the Great Migration, which you called
the golden age for the middle class black Americans.
Exactly. Which is why the 1964 Civil Rights Act is important. It's literally the beginning of the end of why black people were leaving the South. And if you just read it, you realize it just ended discrimination. So does it truly make sense to say the law that stopped black people from being discriminated against hurts black people, but then saying that during the time black people was leaving discrimination, they're doing better? I mean, does it make sense?
In the heart of the 1950s, amidst the backdrop of segregation, a powerful movement began that would reshape America. The sit-ins, initiated by 4 African-American college students in Greensboro, North Carolina, on February 1st, 1960, were not just acts of defiance. They were sparks that ignited a nationwide campaign against racial injustice. These young men, inspired by the teachings of Gandhi and the burgeoning civil rights movement, sat down at a whites-only lunch counter demanding service. Their peaceful protests quickly drew attention, and soon sit-ins spread to cities across the South. Demonstrators, often met with hostility, endured verbal abuse and physical violence. Yet they remained steadfast in their commitment to nonviolence. This courageous act of civil disobedience galvanized thousands, inspiring students and activists nationwide to join the fight against segregation. By the summer of 1960, sit-ins had become a staple of the civil rights movement, leading to significant changes in local and federal policies. The courage of these young activists laid the groundwork for future protests and ultimately helped dismantle institutionalized racism in America.
The American Civil Rights Movement was a pivotal struggle for racial equality in the United States, spanning the 1950s and 1960s. Rooted in centuries of systemic racism and segregation, the movement aimed to dismantle oppressive Jim Crow laws, fight for voting rights, and end discrimination in all forms. The movement gained momentum with landmark events, such as the 1954 Supreme Court decision in Brown versus Board of Education, which declared school segregation unconstitutional. In 1955, Rosa Parks' refusal to give up her bus seat in Montgomery, Alabama, ignited the year-long Montgomery bus boycott, a powerful act of economic resistance led by Martin Luther King Jr. Nonviolent protests became a hallmark of the movement, from sit-ins at segregated lunch counters to the Freedom Rides, where activists challenged segregation on interstate buses. In 1963, the March on Washington brought over 250,000 people to the Lincoln Memorial, where King delivered his iconic "I Have a Dream" speech, envisioning a future of equality. Key victories included the Civil Rights Act of 1964, outlawing segregation and employment discrimination, and the Voting Rights Act of 1965, protecting voting rights for Black Americans. Despite fierce opposition, the movement reshaped America, laying the foundation for ongoing struggles against racial injustice and inspiring global human rights efforts. Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. Martin Luther King Jr.
Black people have been knowing that we can drink out of a water fountain. We've been knowing that we can vote. We've been knowing that we can go into a movie theater. The white folks didn't know. So they created policy to make it for them to be like, hey, white folks, niggas can vote. Niggas can drink out the water fountain. So he argued that the civil rights bills was not for black folks, that was for white folks. In this, I think that he's getting at the criminalization of participation in democracy, especially for black people. My question, you know what I'm saying, is this right here. I got the question right here is, after the civil rights, after the Civil War, the 13th Amendment, it abolished slavery. How did this exception of slavery allow for the convict lease system? And how do we see this acceptance of slavery in the broader concept of democracy?
You're sitting in a moment in history right now, but it's not going to feel historic when you're sitting in it. It's just going to feel like another day. This is the third Reconstruction. It started in 2020. It's going to go to 2030 or thereabouts. The first Reconstruction was about freedom. The second one, civil rights movement, was about access. My hero, Andrew Young, has a documentary out October 17th on MSNBC called The Dirty Work. Watch it. He's 93 years old, the last living lieutenant of Dr. King. You're living in a moment in history. Third Reconstruction is about access, opportunity, and ownership. From civil rights to civil rights. From the streets to the suites. This is your time. This country cannot grow without you. Don't look at a situation that we are in as a negative. We can't fall from the floor. Black folks have a 44% home ownership rate compared to 75% of our white counterparts. He's already said, number one way you build wealth in America? Home ownership. What do they want? Mortgages. Most of our businesses don't have employees. What did I just tell you? You can go buy a business and don't even need a personal guarantee to do it. And nobody else wants them. AI is coming. It's going to change everything by 2030. You won't recognize the world, but you guys live on your phone. This doesn't intimidate you. 99% of nobody knows anything about AI. White folks do. That means it's equal opportunity discrimination. Here's one easy one for you. Any small business 5 years ago bought a website, got a website built, cost them $5,000. You go into your local community in Columbus, Georgia, in Nashville, Tennessee, go in your local community and just start calling up businesses. I will redo your website with AI and e-commerce for $500. I'll do it in a week. What small business owner who just spent $5,000 5 years ago would not say yes to $500? It costs you $50. That is a 90% profit margin. You do 2,000 of those in a year, you've made $1 million. That's just an easy one. Everything's gonna am I talking to myself? No. Everything's getting reimagined, everything under AI. So whether it's artificial intelligence or home ownership or getting your credit score up, so if you raise credit scores 100 points in our community, neighborhood by neighborhood, you stabilize Black America. You go to the computer at midnight with a 700 credit score, it don't ask you whether you're Black, whether you're female, what political party you're in, it says yes. Midnight, somebody just told me outside, he tested what I told him. Get your credit score to 700, there you go, get your credit score to 700, go to the computer, don't ask for nothing crazy, but sub $100,000 credit request, it said yes, right? I'm telling you, this stuff works. You can't fall from the floor.
Cheek, no more blessing our enemies, no more praying for those who despitefully use us. We're going to.
I watch this conversation every time it comes up on my For You because he's just so right. I feel like the good YT people would have to become just as radical as the far right about undoing what's been done in order for things to change. But they won't do that. They won't do that because that will cause them to be outcast from their own tribes. Okay? And I know that some people are doing this. I know that some people, some YT people are the radical person in their family that don't mind falling out with everybody over saying and doing the right thing. I'm not talking about them. I'm talking about the ones who are still sitting in the middle. The ones who know what the right thing are and are sitting and choosing to do nothing. Sometimes that is the worst thing to possibly do, to know exactly what to do and to do nothing. They don't want to look like us on the world stage after being outcasted. They don't want to be disrespected by their majority. They don't want to be degraded by their majority. They don't want to be unalived by their majority for doing what they know is right. This is why we get performative support or no support at all, because they're scared to step out of line. And so are we, scared to step out of line. They won't do anything at their protest, which makes it a parade, and we won't come outside. Y'all done seen Game of Thrones. Y'all done seen The Hunger Games. You've seen, I don't know if you've seen, what's the name of that movie? V for Vendetta. Where all the anonymous masks came from. I think some of y'all think that that's just the internet thing. Go watch V for Vendetta. Your freedom is not going to be given to you. You have to take it. And no, it doesn't always have to look like tearing up stuff and fighting people. Stop giving them your money. Stop giving them your time, your bodies, your lives. Be free. Free yourself. Are you hearing me? I hope so. I love you and I mean it.
that black Americans are poorer today in 2024 than they were in the 1950s?
Yes. Why do you think that
Good
is?
question. So we have the Civil Rights Act, we have more benefits, more government programs. Something changed between the 1950s and 2024. So there's two answers to this question. Either America got more racist since 1950s to 2024, so like that 70-year period, because black Americans are worse off today per capita than they were. You agree with that? Okay, good.
Yeah.
Than in the 1950s. Or there's another explanation, and I think the truth is somewhere in the middle, which is I think you would acknowledge that the disappearance of the black father has been the #1 driver of black poverty in this country.
Lock in, fuck niggas. We about to fact check this shit. First, if you fuck with me, check out that podcast. Let's get it. What the hell are you talking about? Did he just says that black people were doing better during segregation than they are now? Charlie Kirk had a chance to do his research, he would realize that he was wrong. In the 1940s, 60% of black women were domestic servants. And if we see today, we see that 60% of black women are actually working white-collar jobs. During the 1940s, only 5% of black men worked in white-collar jobs. In the 1960s, a quarter of black men were working white-collar jobs. And when we talk about education, more black people are receiving an education now than they were in the 1940s. Not to mention, 1940s and before, black people were facing lynching, race riots, and redlining. So again, if we have to compare black people's living conditions now to the 1940s, black people have better living conditions. But when we compare black people now to white people now, yes, there's an extreme problem. You see, what we need to understand is that Brown versus Board of Education did end segregation, but it didn't end the discrimination that black people will face. In fact, hate crimes rooted in race is the most common hate crime here in America, and black people face it the most. Not to mention that black people are still more likely to face hiring discrimination during the job process. But you want to blame it on single-parent household, although majority of black children have their father in their lives. Research also says that a black child with 2 parents are still more likely to face poverty or incarceration compared to a white child with 2 parents. Why? Because black people still face racial discrimination despite their family dynamics. But you never acknowledge that. Now, ironically, your children's in a single-parent household.
All right, let's go ahead and continue on with Malcolm X's The Ballad or the Bullet. Where we last left off, we were talking about what is needed to change what has happened during civil rights, the awakening of black Americans, the understanding of how criminal it is that the United States is treating other people and what is necessary. And again, one of it is understanding that right now civil rights is not a worldwide issue for black Americans at this time or for the Negroes, but it is a civil rights that falls under the jurisdiction of the United States government and therefore Uncle Sam. So let's go ahead and continue. But the United Nations has what's known as the Charter of Human Rights. It has a committee that deals in human rights. You may wonder why all of the atrocities that have been committed in Africa and in Hungary and in Asia and in Latin America are brought before the UN, and the Negro problem is never brought before the UN. This is part of the conspiracy. This old, tricky, blue-eyed liberal who's supposed to be your friend and my friend, supposed to be in our corner, supposed to be subsidizing our struggles, and supposed to be acting in the capacity of an advisor, never tells you anything about human rights. They keep you wrapped up in civil rights, and you spend so much time barking up the civil rights tree, you don't even know there's a human rights tree on the same floor. And I think that's what he's getting at, is the trick. And it's even more trickier as we've learned now, especially with the way the current regime is treating the United Nations, is it's hard to get help from the United Nations when the person who's in charge is committing human rights violations or civil rights violations on its own people. You can go and say, we're going to help out other countries, but stay out of our business. This is another reason why civil rights was considered a domestic issue. And not understanding that human rights, that a lot of people's human rights were being violated. Something that we're still not fully understanding. We still think that these are rights of a civil matter or inalienable rights, but these are just, and inalienable rights are human rights. This is something we need to start thinking about more. When you expand the civil rights struggle to the level of human rights, you can then take the case of the black man in this country before the nations in the UN. You can take it before the General Assembly. You can take Uncle Sam before a world court. But the only level you can do it on is the level of human rights. Civil rights keeps you under his restrictions, under his jurisdictions. Civil rights keeps you in your pocket. Civil rights means you're asking Uncle Sam to treat you right. Human rights are something you are born with. Human rights are your God-given rights. Human rights are the rights that are recognized by all nations of this earth, and anytime anyone violates your human rights, you can take them to the World Court. And that is something that we have to learn about, especially when I've had discussions and debates about inalienable rights. It has become so automatic that the white majority says, yeah, everybody should have rights, but they don't understand what that entails. Whereas I've seen, and then looking at the history of black people's struggles, is we're always fighting for the very human rights that the founding fathers said all people should be given. All Malcolm X is doing right here is basically saying the same thing that Thomas Jefferson said that he got from John Locke. Uncle Sam's hands are dripping with blood the blood of the black man in this country. He is Earth's #1 hypocrite. He has the audacity. Yes, he has. Imagine posing as the leader of the free world, and you over here singing, "We shall overcome." Expand the civil rights struggle to the level of human rights. Take it into the United Nations, where our African brothers can throw their weight on our side, where our Asian brothers can throw their weight on our side, where our Latin American brothers can throw their weight on our side, and where 800 million Chinamen are sitting there waiting to throw their weight on our side. Let the world know how bloody his hands are. Let the world know the hypocrisy that's practiced over here. Let it be the ballot or the bullet. Let him know that it must be the ballot or the bullet. And again, losing Malcolm X, losing Martin Luther King Jr., we lost that guidance because, yes, this was told in a speech, but a speech that wasn't shared among everybody, all for the time, Negroes at the time, to continue to push for that. If either were still alive, then yes, we would probably have taken the next evolutionary step, saying this is not just civil rights, this is basic human rights that are being denied. And then that takes it from, oh, well, it's a civil matter. It's only locally for the United States, to, oh, you guys are treating humans bad. And I think that's something that I wish we would have been able to understand 62 years ago. But unfortunately, with Malcolm X and Martin Luther King Jr.'s death, we never had that guidance, and we became fractured for so long. When you take your case to Washington, D.C., you're taking it to the criminal who's responsible. It's like running from the wolf to the fox. They're all in cahoots together. They all work political chicanery and make you look like a chump before the eyes of the world. Here you are walking around America, getting ready to be drafted and sent abroad like a tin soldier, and when you get over there, people ask you what you're fighting for, and you have to stick your tongue in your cheek. No. Take Uncle Sam to court. Take him before the world. By ballot, I only mean freedom. Don't you know? I disagree with Lomax on this issue, that the ballot is more important than the dollar. Can I prove it? Yes, look at the UN. There are poor nations in the UN. Yet those poor nations can get together with their voting power and keep the rich nations from making a move. They have one nation, one vote. Everyone has an equal vote. And when those brothers from Asia and Africa and the darker parts of this earth get together, their voting power is sufficient to hold Sam in check, or Russia in check, or some other section of the earth in check. So the ballot is the most important. And that's a key. Because until recently, with this current administration, as powerful as the United States was, they still played the UN game. They didn't make major military moves without UN support. They had that image to uphold. And that's why, as we're learning, there were so many clandestine operations to destabilize countries that the UN wasn't aware of. If we, at the time, had not held our tongues and been like, well, still dealing with segregation and slavery, PTSD, and fear of retribution, I think, again, the United States would have been held more accountable for trying to be the, as he said, the leader of the free world, while at the same time not providing that same freedom to your own citizens. So this shows that as important as the dollar is, the ballot is just as important. And I think I'm going to stop there because the next paragraph is pretty long. But again, these are very key things. This is where we have to fight against fatalism and this mindset that our vote doesn't matter. I think we've learned as a community, as Black people, that our vote, it does matter, that it is powerful. And I think we're also learning and understanding and realizing that not only does our vote matter, our dollars matter as well. Remember, if our votes didn't matter, then they would not have created entire strategies to garner our votes. That is something we need to understand, because right now, in the idea of white supremacy or a white majority, they all have the same goal. Now they just differ on the details. And that's where we come in. In a way, we're America's moral compass. Because where we go, progress goes. And we have historical evidence up to today on how the morality of this country goes. When they are ignored, the morality of this country goes into the toilet, as we're seeing right now. So again, very interesting. So let me know what you think, and I hope you guys are enjoying this.
After the Rwandan genocide, a woman had to live next to the person who killed her kids. That's the kind of things that happens in war. So when you talk about like what happens after a civil war, this is something that really has to be addressed. How do you live with these people? Because you're going to see the depravity of the things that they've done, and you're going to have to live with them because you're going to have to rebuild the country with them. Or you're going to have to go really authoritarian and purge them, right? Like you are going to have to see the evils that your side did, the other side did, and then be in a country with the survivors of both. And this is normally why I say civil war is the last resort, because it forever damages a generation, and it damages 2 to 3 generations after. Parts of Mozambique were damaged for so long that they are now just starting to not feel the legacies of the war. Rwanda is a very good example of how sometimes you just have to live with the people that do all these evil things. And this is something that if you guys don't want to live with Trump supporters now, if you guys don't want to live with ICE now, imagine if you guys have to live with the extreme version of this that occurs in a civil war. This is why I'm a bigger fan of reform, because reform, you can change the way people think, you can change the way people act.
Hi, my name is Peniel Joseph, and today is Pub Day for Freedom Season, my tribute to 1963, a year of joy and triumph, but also tragedy and grief. This is a book that I've been wanting to share for some time. It details everything from the March on Washington to the Birmingham Spring to the deaths of Medgar Evers to James Baldwin's really heroic role that year in transforming the language of freedom, democracy, dignity, and citizenship. Well, when we think about 1963, it's really a panoramic year. And so this book, Freedom Season, provides a kaleidoscopic look at 1963. So I really wanted to look at the way in which activists like Gloria Richardson from Cambridge, Maryland, Lorraine Hansberry, the brilliant Black feminist and playwright and activist, helped to shape the contours of freedom and democracy and dignity that year in ways that sometimes are left out. You have activists like Malcolm X and James Baldwin and Gloria Richardson, Lorraine Hansberry, Martin Luther King Jr., so many others who are defining and reimagining what freedom, democracy, citizenship means for Americans of all backgrounds. Well, you discover a lot of different things through this narrative. We see 6 Black children are killed in one day in Birmingham in the aftermath of the 16th Street Baptist Church bombing and some other killings of Black young people that happened that day, the assassinations of Medgar Evers and John F. Kennedy and many others that year. But there is a profound sense of hope and really renewed faith in what multiracial democracy can mean. And that's really led by Black folks who are reimagining what citizenship and dignity can mean, and really debating that amongst themselves as well. Freedom Season is out today, and I hope it both offers a deeper understanding of our history and a renewed sense of urgency for the present. And make sure you grab a copy of Freedom Season, available anywhere that books are sold. And I want to hear from you, so let's talk. What lessons from the past do you think we still haven't learned, and what gives you hope that we all can? Thank you.
The Civil Rights Act of 1964, the law that changed America. In 1964, America was a nation divided by color, custom, and fear. Black Americans were denied jobs, schools, and even a seat at the lunch counter. Then came one law, born from struggle, filibusters, and faith, that changed the country forever. The Civil Rights Act of 1964. For nearly a century after slavery ended, segregation ruled public life. Jim Crow laws kept Black and white Americans separate in schools, restaurants, buses, even hospitals. The civil rights movement of the 1950s and 60s, led by voices like Martin Luther King Jr., Rosa Parks, and countless others, demanded that America live up to its own promise, liberty and equality for all. President John F. Kennedy first proposed the Civil Rights Act in 1963, after seeing the violence in Birmingham, Alabama. But before it could pass, Kennedy was assassinated. His successor, Lyndon B. Johnson, took up the cause, saying, "We shall overcome." In Congress, Southern senators tried to block the bill, filibustering for 83 days, the longest in U.S. history at the time. But thanks to Republican leader Everett Dirksen, enough votes came together to end the debate. And on July 2nd, 1964, Johnson signed the bill into law on live television. The Civil Rights Act outlawed discrimination based on race, color, religion, sex, or national origin. It ended segregation in public places like schools, restaurants, hotels, and banned employers from discriminating in hiring or pay. It created the EEOC, the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, to enforce those rights. It was a turning point, a legal and moral victory that opened the door to voting rights, fair housing, and women's equality. It didn't end racism, but it gave citizens the power to change it, in court and in culture. Some said the law went too far. Others said it didn't go far enough. But for millions, it meant one thing. For the first time, America's ideals were written not just in words, but in law. The Civil Rights Act of 1964 was more than legislation. It was a moral reset for a divided nation. Proof that justice doesn't arrive all at once, but through courage, persistence, and the belief that equality is worth the fight. Follow for our next Civics Deep Dive, the Voting Rights Act of 1965, the fight to protect the ballot. Because freedom means little if your voice can't be heard.
Jim Crow, then versus now, has America really changed? After the Civil War, the Jim Crow era created a system designed to keep people separate and unequal. Segregation signs, voter suppression, and fear ruled the South for nearly a century. Today, the signs are gone, but some say the system never fully disappeared, it just evolved. Back then, Black Americans had to pass literacy tests to vote. Now, modern voter ID laws, polling closures, and registration barriers still make it harder for some communities to cast a ballot. Jim Crow enforced segregation through neighborhoods and schools. Now many schools remain divided not by law, but by economics and zip codes. Even the justice system shows echoes of the past. During Jim Crow, arrests and prison labor kept people trapped in poverty. Today, mass incarceration and racial disparities continue to raise the same questions. Is equality fully real or still in progress? But here's the truth, awareness is power. The The more we learn about where these systems began, the better we can change where they're going. Do you think modern America still lives under a different kind of Jim Crow? Drop your thoughts below and follow for more history that connects the past and present.
Brown's first day at Pinkston, but rather than coming on the bus, her mother brought her.
Right.
Why?
We didn't know where to catch the bus at.
Are you nervous about Betty's being here?
Yes.
Why?
Well, it's always the first time.
What about you, Betty? Are you nervous?
Uh-huh.
Have you had a chance to talk to any of the kids yet?
No.
What are you nervous about?
Oh, nothing. I've been in a new school that I don't even know.
Do you think it'll be a long time before Pinkston becomes your school rather than just a school you're attending?
Yes.
More so than if you were at an all-white school?
No.
That doesn't bother you?
No.
Does it bother you, Mrs. Brown?
You mean about it being an all-colored school? No.
Do you think it's bothering many of the parents?
Yes, definitely. Oh, it bothers me that my kid has to change the district, is all. As far as going with a colored, no.
This is the most ridiculous thing that has ever happened. The Negroes are just as free as we are. We have the same opportunity to work and to build their part of the town up just the same as we have. I just don't understand it and don't approve of it. I'm going to stand up for my rights.
Thank you very much. Jim Knight with WALB Television News. We're soliciting the views of many people on the Civil Rights Bill. Would you like to give us your views?
Well, I think if they remain peaceful, it would be a lot better than perhaps the violence that would be concerned. Well, of course, being a Southerner, I'm not for it at all.
I see.
And I just don't know how it's going to turn out. I hope we don't have any trouble.
We're soliciting opinions on the Civil Rights Bill. Would you like to give us yours?
I'm sorry, but I don't think it's the time right now. I think they have equal rights, though.
When Black Americans started demanding civil rights, they weren't just trying to sit at a lunch counter. They were forcing the federal government to pick a side. That's what was happening. And once the federal government picked a side, once they created enforcement, that enforcement didn't magically stop at one group. That's the part people miss. Before 1964, if your company didn't hire you because you were a woman, because you had an accent, because your name sounded foreign, there wasn't much you could do federally. After the Civil Rights Act, specifically Title VII, the government had actual power to investigate workplace discrimination. And the law didn't just say Black. It said race, color, religion, sex, national origin. That language matters. And I'm going to tell you why. Women used it to challenge sexism. Latino workers used it. Asian Americans used it. Religious minorities used it. And decades later, LGBTQ workers leaned on that same legal framework in court. That enforcement spine was built because Black people forced it to be built, specifically Black Americans. Other communities just walked through it. And immigration, let's talk about that. Before 1965, U.S. immigration law openly favored white Europeans. It was engineered that way. Now, after the moral logic of civil rights took hold, after the country publicly said radical hierarchy is wrong, those quotas became harder to defend. So the Immigration and Nationality Act of 1965 changes the game. And suddenly, you see more immigration from the Caribbean, from Africa, from Asia, from Latin America. The America that people argue about today, the multilingual, layered, global America, that demographic is tied to civil rights logic. Once you say race can't determine rights at home, it gets real awkward to keep race determining who can enter the country. That's probably what that orange buffoon meant when he said that civil rights actually hurt white people. But here's what actually moves me. The people who forced these changes, they weren't powerful on paper. They were teenagers, preachers, domestic workers, students, regular people who were just tired. They didn't have armies. They had discipline. They understood that if you expose a country's contradictions long enough, especially when that country is claiming to be the leader of the free world, it's going to either reform or embarrass itself globally. So they used that pressure strategically. And when the country finally moved, it built tools that it couldn't fully control anymore. Once you create federal mechanisms to fight discrimination, you can't decide only one group gets to use them. That's the quiet genius of it all. So how did it help more than just Black people, because it forced the country to hardwire anti-discrimination into federal law. It reshaped immigration. It created enforcement that other communities could lean on. It changed the architecture, not perfectly, not permanently, but fundamentally. And the pride in that isn't loud, it's just steady. Because people who were told that they didn't belong reshaped the legal structure of belonging for themselves and for everyone else who came after. This is why it's important to know history.
Civil rights keeps you under his restrictions, under his jurisdiction. Human rights are something you were born with. Human rights are your God-given rights. Anytime anyone violates your human rights, you can take them to the world court. Fear is not accidental. It is cultivated. When people are taught to fear each other, they stop uniting. And a divided people are always easier to control than a fearless one.
Welcome back. You've just had very different voices, very different emotions, and that's the reason why this conversation refuses to die. Because civil rights didn't just change laws, it did change relationships, power, and the direction of Black Americans in ways that, people still don't agree 6 years later. For some, civil rights represents victory. They cite the end of, legal segregation, access to schools, jobs, housing, and the right to challenge discrimination in court. And that, folks, matters a lot. No serious conversation can pretend this doesn't. But for others, especially the clips you just watched, civil rights marks the beginning of something else, a slow unraveling of Black-owned systems, family stability, and economic independence that existed under segregation. And that's the tension. You'll notice something important in those clips. Nobody's saying nothing changed, but they're saying that the change came at a cost that wasn't explained, a cost that wasn't voted, a cost that many people didn't realize until, decades later. This is why people get emotional when they hear "just get over it." Because this wasn't ancient history. This wasn't medieval time, This was the lifetime of people who are still alive to this day. And before I go any further, I want to be clear about something. This video isn't about nostalgia, it's not about romanticizing the past, and it's not about pretending segregation was good, This is about asking a harder, more uncomfortable question. Did progress come early in one direction, or did it quietly take something with it? So before I get to my breakdown, we really need to understand, what civil rights really delivered, what it never promised, and what it may unintentionally dismantled along the way. Let's start there. So to move forward honestly, we need to start with what civil rights era, actually delivered. Not what people feel about it, not what politics turned it into, but what materially changed in paper and in law. First, the Civil Act right, it did end segregation. Not social racism, not personal prejudice, but the law itself could no longer openly separate people by race in public spaces, employment or education. That really matters. It also created something that didn't exist before, legal recourse. For the first time family, Black Americans could sue employers, schools, and institutions for discrimination. That shifted power slowly, unevenly, but permanently family. Then came voting protections, immigration reform, and the broad access, to public life. America stopped being legally reserved for one racial group, That single shift changed the country forever. You can draw a straight line from that moment to milestones people once thought were impossible. A Black president, serving 2 terms, Black cultural dominance in music and sports, global influence in media, literature, and business. These doors were real, these opportunities were real, and dismissing that reality only weakens the argument instead of, making it way stronger. But here's where the nuance matters, Access is not the same as control, family, Opportunity is not the same as ownership, and inclusion is not the same as independence. Civil rights open doors, into existing systems, schools, corporations, government structures, but it did not guarantee Black ownership of these systems. And that distinction is where the agreement begins. Because while many people were integrating into America's institutions, something else was happening quietly in the background. Black ran ecosystems that had existed because of segregation began to, weaken or disappear. So yes, civil rights changed America in undeniable ways, but the real debate isn't whether progress happened. It's whether the form that the progress took, came with trade-offs that no one was prepared for. And that's where we go to next, family. This is where the conversation turns, uncomfortable. Because this isn't about laws anymore. It's about structure. Before civil rights, Black Americans, were largely locked out of white institutions. That was brutal, unjust, and violent. But in response to that exclusion, Black communities built parallel systems. Their own schools, hospitals, churches, businesses, newspapers, and professional networks. Not because segregation was good family, but because self-reliance was necessary. In many series, Black money circulated within Black neighborhoods. Doctors treated Black patients, teachers taught Black children, business owners hired locally, families knew where their economic power lived, then integration happened. And suddenly, access to white institutions became the priority. White schools, white hospitals, white banks, white corporations. So on paper, that looked like progress, family. And sure, in many ways it was. But here's the question many people are asking right now. What happens, when a community stops investing in its own systems and, starts depending on someone else? As integration expanded, family, many Black-owned institutions quietly collapsed. Not because they were inferior, no, but because they were no longer protected, prioritized, or funded. Black hospitals closed, Black schools were absorbed or shut down, Black business couldn't compete with the national chains, and Black banking, critically, it was never protected under civil rights law. So yes, doors opened, but many argue that, the house we once controlled was slowly abandoned. This is why you hear older voices saying things like, we had more than, we do have right now. They're not talking about freedom, they're talking about control. And this is why the Golden Age debate is quite emotional. Some remember stronger families and tighter communities. Others point out poverty, migration, and limited wealth. Both memories exist. The real issue isn't whether segregation was better. Of course it wasn't. The issue is whether integration came without a plan, to preserve Black ownership. And when ownership disappears, power follows. That's the wound many people feel, even if they can't always, articulate it. Next, we need to talk about why Jim Crow didn't vanish after civil rights. So one of the biggest misunderstandings about the civil rights era is the belief that, once segregation became illegal, the system that enforced it would simply disappear. Actually, it didn't. It only adapted. Jim Crow was never just about signs and separate water fountains. It was about controlling movement, labor, education, and political power. When the laws changed, these goals found new mechanisms. Voting is a clear example. While literacy tests and poll taxes were outlawed, new barriers did emerge. ID laws, limited polling locations, aggressive purging of voter rolls. These policies may look neutral on paper, but their impact often isn't. Education followed a similar path. Schools are no longer segregated by race in law, but they are frequently divided by zip code and income. Since wealth in America is deeply tied to race and history, the outcomes look familiar, even if the language has changed, family. Then there's the criminal justice system. After civil rights, incarceration rates did explode. Policies framed as, law and order disproportionately swept Black men, out of communities, removing labor, leadership, and family stability. Prison labor replaced plantation labor in form, if not in name. This is why so many people say slavery never ended, it only transformed. And when people hear that and feel offended, it's usually because they're thinking emotionally, not structurally. The system didn't need change anymore, it needed paperwork. This is also why people in the comment section, they talk about anger, not just sadness, because they recognize the pattern. They see that while, the appearance of equality improved, the outcomes often didn't. Civil rights removed the mask from racism, but it didn't dismantle, the machine that benefited from it. Until we understand that revolution, we'll keep arguing about symptoms instead of causes. Next, we have to confront the role of government, politics, and trust, and why so many people, Black and white, feel betrayed by the promises of the civil rights era. Once you understand access versus ownership and how Jim Crow laws evolved, the next question becomes unavoidable. Who was actually in control of the direction Black Americans was pushed in after civil rights? This is where distrust in government enters the conversation, not as a slogan, folks, but as lived experiences. The civil rights push required federal power, without it, segregation would have lasted forever. But federal power always comes with conditions. Once Washington stepped in, it didn't just enforce rights, it began reshaping social and economic behavior. Welfare policies are often cited here. Assistance was necessary for many families, but the structure of these programs, sometimes punished two parents' households. Men were pushed out of their homes to qualify for aid. Over time, that changed family dynamics in ways no laws ever openly debated. At the same time, immigration policy shifted, opening the country to global labor. That wasn't inherently bad, but it changed competition for jobs, wages, and political attention family. Many Black Americans felt their struggle was no longer central once legal barriers fell. This is why you hear people reference statements attributed to leaders like Lyndon B. Johnson, not because they love conspiracy folks, but because they sense political loyalty being taken for granted. Decades later, leaders like Ronald Reagan trapped into broader skepticism of government intervention, while modern figures like Donald J. Trump openly criticized civil rights laws, reigniting old wounds and new debates. Here's the key point. This isn't about parties, it's about power incentives. Government respond to pressure, numbers, and stability, not moral loyalty. Once the civil rights crisis passed, many Black communities felt politically parked instead of protected. And when trust breaks, people don't stop voting because they're lazy, they stop because they feel used. That feeling, fair or not, is central to why this debate still burns. Now let's bring it up all together. The civil rights era changed the law. It expanded access, it opened doors that had been locked for generations, but doors opening isn't the same as ownership family. And equality in writing isn't always equality in outcome. Progress happened, but so did structural shifts that many people are still trying to understand to this day. 1964 isn't ancient history, it's living memory. So the real question isn't, did civil rights work? It's this, what do we build now with what we gained and what we learned? If this conversation matters to you, subscribe. Until my next video, stay curious.